Bishop Talbert Swan II is president of the Greater Springfield NAACP. He came in recently to talk with us about the continuing crisis nationwide in relations between police and communities of color. We began, however, with concerns Bishop Swan expressed in a recent newsletter about presidential candidate Donald Trump meeting with African-American clergy seeking their support for his White House bid.
We haven't been able to get 100 African-American pastors together to talk about the proliferation of guns on our streets or the extrajudicial killings of African-American males by police or the epidemic of violence among black men or what's happening in Flint, Michigan with poison water. And so it baffled me how 100 black preachers could decide to come together to sit down with, of all people, Donald Trump, someone whose rhetoric and whose record has not embodied any of the values that are beneficial to the African-American community, who has talked disparagingly about African-Americans, about Mexicans, about anyone who is not white and male, and whose rhetoric has really, in my estimation, been blatantly racist. And he has not come out and stood for anything of importance for our community. So what could he possibly have to say or to offer when we have his entire record to go by?
What do his polling numbers and the passion and anger, I guess you'd almost call it, the crowds coming to his rallies say to you? How much does it concern you?
Well, it concerns me because anybody who has the record that Mr. Trump has and who speaks so recklessly as he does and who yet garners such support, it tells you something about what's in the psyche of many people in American society. He's giving voice to the angry white mob that wants to take our country back. And what I'm afraid of is where they want to take the country back to. Because it looks like they want to go back to a time where people who look like me were not considered full citizens in the United States of America. I don't want to go back to a time where, or to a president that suggests that certain segments of the population should have to carry papers like they did in apartheid South Africa or like slaves had to do in America in the early days. That's dangerous to me.
Is there just a basic misunderstanding, do you think, among some, and that's perhaps a very bad way to put it, but among his supporters of where this country is, who makes up this country? Because we are such a mix of people from around the world, and yet you look at his rallies, and it's pretty much exclusively, as you're saying, white and a lot of white males.
Well, you know, I don't think there's a misunderstanding. I think that racial polarization in this country is high. And I think the election of Barack Obama and his reelection really has revealed that and brought that out to the forefront. I just think that more and more today, people are more overt about racist ideas in particular. And so I think there's no doubt in my mind where they want to bring the country back to. They want to bring it back to a time where it was dominated by white males, that African Americans and Latinos and Asians know their place, that women know their place, and that white males are in charge.
Go to another piece you wrote not long ago. You titled it The Great Grand Jury Farce. And you talked a minute ago about extrajudicial killings. When a questionable police shooting of a black victim, a victim of color, is sent by prosecutors to a grand jury for investigation, you point particularly to the case, just a heartbreaking case in Cleveland. Little kid with a toy gun. You look at that video, police basically drive up and execute him.
Absolutely.
It's
in less than 2 seconds.
The great grand jury farce.
Well, you know, the process of using a grand jury is usually when a prosecutor has made up his mind that there is sufficient evidence to prosecute a case. The grand jury proceeding is a formality. Usually, if someone is arrested here, they're arrested, they're charged, and then if they want to bring it to the superior court, they'll impanel a grand jury. The prosecutor presents all of the evidence. The defense gets to present nothing. That's why they have the saying a prosecutor can prosecute a ham sandwich. If he wants an indictment, he can get an indictment. Now, the only time a prosecutor brings a case against a police officer to a grand jury is when he has no intention on prosecuting the officer and he wants to officially get a no bill. He wants to get no indictment by the grand jury so he can scapegoat the decision off to the grand jury and say, hey, I didn't just decide not to prosecute. The grand jury said the evidence wasn't sufficient, which is a farce. If he wanted to prosecute, file charges and go forward with a trial, with a prosecution. And so it's just a joke. It's a farce. It's a way of allowing police officers to go through a mock judicial proceeding. So there's some semblance of justice. But we that have studied and know how the justice system works, we know that it's a farce.
In your experience, and let's be careful to say we're saying nationwide and your observance, are relations between police and communities of color about as bad as they have been in maybe 40 or 50 years?
Oh, they're terrible. I think they're as bad today as they were in the 60s during the civil rights movement. There is absolutely little trust between communities of color and police departments across the nation. And every time we have something like Michael Brown's killer not being indicted, Sandra Bland's killers not being indicted, Tamir Rice's killer not being indicted, Eric Garner's killers not being indicted, every time we have a high-profile case where an African-American unarmed suspect is basically executed and the police officers get to walk home, eat dinner with their families, and keep going business as usual, it only exacerbates that relationship.
You say it points to the real potency of racism still in this country.
Absolutely. It is a potent issue in our country. W.E.B. Du Bois said in his book, The Souls of Black Folk, over a century ago, he said the problem of the 20th century was the problem of the color line. It's like he was writing today more than 100 years later, because the problem in America, even today in 2016, is still the problem of the color line.
Let's look at another area that's gotten a lot of attention in the last few weeks or so, the entertainment world. It's a little different, but it's still, I think, serious and points to something out there that's just not working. All the major nominations for Oscars this year, and there were a lot of amazing performances by people of color, both in front of and behind the camera, and yet of the major awards, not a single one has an African-American or I think Latino nominee either. No one of color.
Well, you know, whenever you pull out a photo album and put children in front of it, the pictures they gravitate to are the ones that they're in. People like to see themselves as part of the picture. Oscars So White is bad for our culture. It's bad for the arts. And what they're finding out, a new study recently came out, is it's bad for business, because the ratings of the Oscars go down significantly when there are no people of color that have been nominated. And today, for the second year in a row, we've been blinded by the white. And what happens is when blind people can't see, they look away. That's what's happening to the Oscars now. That's what they're afraid of now, is that African Americans and Latinos and Asians and other people are not going to watch the Oscars. And it's a shame that when this issue is highlighted and you talk about the lack of diversity and you talk about racism in terms of the decisions that are being made, people get offended. Many of those that are part of the Motion Picture Academy were offended that racism would even be brought up. Like, how dare you bring that word up in terms of the decisions that we make? Well, not one film that highlights the life of an African American, not one writer, not screenplay, not one actor. Something is wrong in America in 2016 when people keep pointing to the fact that, well, you have a black president, but we still can't get nominated for an Oscar.
Bishop Talbert Swan, President, Greater Springfield NAACP, thanks for coming in. Always a pleasure and an honor to have you with us, sir.
Thanks for having me.